Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, if you are anything like us, your entire mental calendar for the sporting world just ground to a complete halt the moment you heard the news.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about the kind of event that it completely blindsides a fan base, especially one as passionate and, as connected as the tennis community.
It was a seismic shift, wasn't it? A proper off-season bombshell. It's completely redefined the narrative for the 2026 season before a single ball has even been hit.
Utterly. I mean, we're right in the heart of the traditional tennis offseason.
Wednesday, December 17th, to be precise. It's supposed to be quiet. You expect, a few practice session updates on social media, that sort of thing.
And then, completely out of the blue, the biggest sleigh of the year breaks.
Yeah.
The sheer magnitude of it, well, it just instantly created this huge vacuum of speculation.
It really did.
Honestly, my first thought was that it was a terrible phishing attempt, or maybe someone was just digging up old rumors for clicks. But no.
No, it was real.
So today, our mission is, well, it's straightforward. We've compiled all of it, the articles, the player statements, the analyst commentary, and of course the fan reactions that just exploded online. We need to go beyond that initial shock and really figure out what evidence there is to explain this split, why it matters so profoundly to tennis, and, the big one for the coming season, what comes next for Carlos Alcaraz.
And I absolutely must start by framing the gravity of this for you, the listener. This isn't just a standard coaching change. It's not a business decision. This is the dissolution of what the sources are universally describing as an all-time legendary partnership.
That's the key phrase, isn't it?
It is. In professional tennis, where that emotional support and consistency are just paramount, the 7-year relationship between Alcaraz and Juan Carlos-Ferrero, JCF, it was seen as a genuine father-son duo.
It was the bedrock, the absolute cornerstone of his meteoric rise. And that familial element, that's what makes the timing so incredibly jarring. As the sources remind us, this partnership didn't end because of a failure or some slump in form.
Quite the opposite. It ended right after Alcaraz had achieved what many would argue was his pinnacle year.
2 major Grand Slam titles.
And clinching the prestigious year-end #1 ranking.
Logic just dictates you do not make this kind of disruptive change when you are quite literally at the absolute top of the mountain.
You just don't. And that profound contradiction, that's the whole reason we need to do this deep dive.
So the central undisputed fact, Carlos Alcaraz and JCF have ended their 7-year professional relationship. And to gauge the intensity of that, well, you only need to look at the immediate fan reaction.
Oh, the fan reaction. It was something else.
It was legendary in itself, wasn't it? It wasn't just disappointment. It was kind of full-blown digital trauma. People were in shambles, completely speechless at my desk.
I saw one that said, it felt like watching my parents are getting divorced.
Yes, that one. It just perfectly captures the emotional investment fans had in seeing JCF sitting, so stoically in that box.
And the most illustrative, if maybe slightly dramatic, label that started circulating was...
Or tennis 9/11?
That one. Now, despite how hyperbolic that is, it really underscores the level of fundamental shock and confusion this news generated.
It really does. It felt like a violation of the established order of the sport.
The first impulse for everyone was to check the date, wasn't it? Hoping for some poorly timed April Fool's joke.
But no, the reality set in very, very quickly. A defining partnership had just ended, abruptly, right at its zenith.
Okay, let's unpack this official narrative first, because the statements from both of them are the only hard evidence we have, and frankly, they feel inherently contradictory.
They really do.
We've got Carlos Alcaraz's statement, which was emotional, quite detailed, and framed as this really respectful conclusion. What did he actually say, and how did it try to justify this seemingly illogical move? Well, Carlos's statement, which we've got translated from the Spanish original, was profoundly sentimental. It starts by laying bare how difficult this was, saying, it's very difficult for me to write this post.
Right, so straight away he's priming you to understand this wasn't some cold professional exchange.
Right.
This was a painful parting.
Precisely. And he used language that was just so dedicated to JCF's mentorship, noting that Juan Carlos helped him turn childhood dreams into realities.
That detail is so crucial, isn't it? It reminds you that this wasn't some late-stage hire. JCF took a talented but very raw teenager and molded him into the world's best player.
He was there for the incredible journey on and off the court. That's a direct quote.
And central to Carlos's narrative is this idea of reaching a definitive endpoint. He highlights the sheer achievement that they had managed to reach the top.
And here is the sentence, the one that really forms Carlos's primary justification for the timing. He says he feels that if their paths had to diverge, it had to be from up there, from the absolute pinnacle they had aspired to reach together.
It's a very neat, almost romantic concept, isn't it? A way to put a clean, sort of cinematic full stop on a chapter.
Exactly. The masterpiece is finished, they achieved perfection, so the partnership is naturally complete.
He also made sure to heavily emphasize the personal growth, stressing JCF help him grow as an athlete, but above all as a person, which just confirms how much the relationship went beyond the court.
And the final closing sentiment from Carlos just reinforced this idea of a perfect mutual conclusion. He mentioned the peace of mind of knowing we didn't hold anything back and that they enjoyed the process.
It's an absolutely airtight statement of mutual respect and closure. It suggests this was always the destiny once the peak was reached.
I like the plan.
But, and it's a huge but, that's where the narrative of a clean mutual closure just shatters, because JCF's response was, well, it was diametrically opposed in tone and intent.
It really was.
Juan Carlos-Ferrero's statement was dramatically shorter, but it contained 6 words that immediately turned the entire narrative completely upside down.
I wish I could have continued.
Exactly those 6 words.
Precisely. That is the ultimate spanner in the works. What's so fascinating is how those 6 words instantly undermined that perfect cinematic ending Carlos tried to paint.
Completely. If the parting was this mutual agreement reached upon fulfilling their destiny, why express regret? Why a wish to have continued?
It fundamentally implies a reluctance on JCF's part, doesn't it? It shifts the entire balance of who made this decision.
It certainly does. And this one line, it immediately fueled 2 completely conflicting interpretations within the fan and analyst community.
We have to delve into those because they dictate whether we should be looking for some internal conflict or, some external pressure.
Let's start with the first one. Interpretation number 1 is that despite all the success, Carlos made the final clinical decision.
Right. The argument here is that I wish I could have continued is JCF's very subtle, very polite way of confirming he was let go, essentially fired.
And this theory gets a bit more traction when you consider Carlos's need for autonomy, which we'll get into shortly. But it's just so difficult to reconcile with the facts.
It is illogical, isn't it? Firing a coach who just guided you to 2 Grand Slams, who was literally just named ATP Coach of the Year.
Who is universally praised for your development. It's completely counterintuitive. Why on earth would you let go of the winning formula?
Well, the only way it makes sense under this interpretation is if Carlos felt the only way to get full control over his training, his travel schedule, his personal life, to exercise that full autonomy he craves, was to remove the foundational influence of JCF completely, regardless of the success.
So JCF's regret, then, comes from believing Carlos has made a rash decision that could jeopardize his long-term career, even though he loves him like a son.
Yes, it forces us to see that pinnacle statement not as a justification, but as a softer way for Carlos to acknowledge the debt while asserting his own independence.
But then let's look at the other side, interpretation number 2, which suggests that JCF did step away, but because of circumstances beyond his control.
In this case, I wish I could have continued is a genuine reflection of his desire to stay, but his personal reality forced the change.
This could be family demands or, and this is the worrying one, health issues.
And this interpretation maintains the friendly nature of the split, but explains the suddenness and the regret without implying any friction with Carlos.
There was also a third, more diplomatic reading suggested by one analyst. That saying, I wish I could have continued. It's simply a polite, gracious, professional thing to say when you leave a demanding role.
Even when you initiate it.
Right. To soften the blow for the person you're leaving behind, or just to express genuine sadness over what you're missing out on. It's a way to be sentimental without being dramatic.
But the very fact that we are spending this much time dissecting 6 words just underscores how unstable the official story really is. It throws the responsibility for the split right back into this abyss of speculation.
Which leads us directly into the core theories circulating about the real reason this happened now. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. Because, as we've established, the split makes no intuitive sense based purely on performance.
None whatsoever.
So the online community, tennis analysts, they immediately started hunting for reasons beyond that official, very emotional narrative. You have 7 years of success, JCF wins Coach of the Year, and yet they part ways.
We absolutely have to explore the 3 leading and often contradictory theories from the source material.
I mean, the fact that it ended at the pinnacle of success means the real reason has to be non-negotiable, doesn't it? Something outside the normal parameters of a training schedule.
Or something so fundamental to their philosophy of the game that it just became insurmountable.
Let's start with Theory A, Juan Carlos Ferrero's personal life and travel fatigue. This is the most professional, the most common reason for elite coaches to step back, and there is strong contextual evidence to support it.
Oh, the evidence is manifold. JCF is wealthy, he was a former world number one himself, he has significant business interests.
Primarily his own high-profile academy that needs constant attention.
Exactly. And the sources confirm that JCF has been expressing a desire to step back for some time to prioritize his family and his academy.
And when you look at the reality of coaching a top-level superstar like Alcaraz, the tour schedule is absolutely brutal.
It's grueling. We are talking about being away from home for 40 or more weeks a year. For a man who's already achieved immense personal success and is prioritizing his family, that schedule just becomes unsustainable.
And what's more, the sources show that JCF had already started this process of disengagement. He'd been traveling less and less with Carlos.
Right, and Samuel Lopez from the Ferrero Academy team was consistently attending tournaments as the main acting coach.
So that provided Alcaraz with continuity while giving JCF some relief.
It did. So if this theory holds, the full split is simply speeding up a slow, planned transition.
JCF finally decides he can't even sustain the reduced travel load. And given that Carlos just hit year-end number one, he sees his mission as complete and chooses to fully dedicate himself to his private life and the academy.
It provides a very clean, professional, and amicable exit.
It does. Again, we must come back to that critical counterpoint, and this is where the tension is.
The 6 words.
The 6 words. If the decision was JCF's deliberate choice to step back for his family, why the dramatic, "I wish it could have continued"?
A man choosing his family usually frames it as a necessary, bittersweet victory, doesn't he? Not a regretted end.
Exactly. The wording so strongly suggests that JCF was either forced out or compelled by circumstances he just couldn't control.
Which, of course, brings us to the more concerning possibility. Theory B, health concerns.
This theory gained traction so quickly because it perfectly explains the suddenness and the regretful tone of JCF's statement.
Yes, this theory speaks directly to how abrupt it all was. Rumors about JCF's health had circulated a few months prior, even though he'd publicly dismissed them at the time.
But fans were quick to recall those whispers when the news broke, expressing real anxiety.
The fear was palpable in the fan commentary. You saw users saying they hoped the rumors about his health that we brushed off as fake will not turn out to be true.
A sudden, non-negotiable health issue would immediately override any scheduling concerns or professional success, wouldn't it? It would force an immediate, permanent departure that JCF would genuinely regret.
And critically, if this were the case, it would fully align with Carlos's emotional statement. Carlos could be honoring JCF's privacy by framing the split as a mutual end at the pinnacle.
While JCF's regretful comment acknowledges the reality that he must leave the job he loves.
It's a tragic scenario, but one that logically ties together all the disparate evidence we have.
Both A and B posit these external non-conflict reasons. But the most compelling and potentially most consequential theory, the one that speaks to a fundamental incompatibility, is Theory C.
Ah, yes. Friction, autonomy, and the pressure to be Big Three standard.
This theory is rooted in the deep insights from that Netflix documentary and other sources that had access to the inner workings of the team.
It's a generational and philosophical clash, isn't it, between an old-school champion coach and a uniquely talented, modern superstar.
How exactly did JCF define that Big Three standard, and why did that create a conflict with Carlos?
Well, JCF, having been a former world number one and having watched the relentless careers of Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic, heavily emphasizes that reaching and crucially staying at that level requires extreme focus and sacrifice.
Meaning monastic dedication.
Yeah.
Absolute priority given to recovery and training, minimal external distraction.
Exactly. And Alcaraz, while a genius talent, is very young and, by all accounts, incredibly charismatic and social. The sources say he chafed at the restrictions that JCF imposed.
He fundamentally needed time to step away from tennis to reset and have fun. He wanted a relatively normal life off the court.
And that desire for autonomy became the clearest friction point in the partnership.
It's a classic tension. The relentless pursuit of greatness demands total sacrifice, but Carlos needed that balance.
And the sources gave specific examples of this tension showing up professionally. Carlos reportedly overruled JCF several times to take his own vacations.
Now, that's a big deal. It suggests that even when JCF outlined specific rest or training protocols, Carlos made the executive decision to override them, prioritizing his mental need for a break.
And did the sources suggest JCF felt Carlos was jeopardizing preparation for specific tournaments?
Yes, absolutely. The source notes that this friction came to a head pretty badly last year before his Chanel slam, meaning before a major where preparation was critical.
And it was also cited as a contributing factor to his end-of-season woes. The tension wasn't just abstract, it reportedly translated into real-world performance dips.
That's vital. If the split happened because Carlos insisted on an approach, a life-work balance, that JCF genuinely believed was incompatible with sustaining the world #1 ranking, then the dissolution becomes strategic, not personal.
It becomes a question of philosophy. Carlos has stepped up in his own autonomy a lot. He's 22, he knows how to win, and he might have told JCF that he intends to manage his career on his own terms.
Terms that include more rest, more fun, and less pressure to constantly meet that theoretical Big Three standard of relentlessness.
Exactly. And if JCF couldn't endorse that philosophy, he might have been forced to state his regret and walk away. Or Carlos might have ended the partnership to hire someone who supports his vision of high performance combined with a normal life.
So we're left with three incredibly detailed yet vastly different possible explanations, all supported by some aspect of the available source material. A deliberate choice by JCF for family, an unforeseen health issue, or a strategic growing chasm over the philosophy and commitment required to dominate the sport.
It's a remarkably complex situation that the official statements really only paper over. And if we connect this all to the bigger picture, the impact of the split inevitably forces a pretty harsh reevaluation of Carlos's recent performance. And perhaps more dramatically, his defining rivalry with Jannik Sinner.
The psychological ripple effect here just cannot be overstated, can it?
Not at all. Let's start with that performance review. We celebrate the two major titles, the year-end #1, which is, of course, stunning. But when you dig into the sources, there is this consistent undercurrent of criticism about his form.
That's right. While Alcaraz had his best year by far in terms of trophies, critics and fans alike were noting that his level was too inconsistent this year at times.
And when you're held up against the big three, inconsistency is a massive liability. Fans felt he shouldn't be struggling that much in matches against lower-ranked players.
Often needing these marathon five-setters or suffering mental lapses in tie-breaks.
And this inconsistency feeds directly back into that philosophical friction we just discussed. If JCF was stressing relentless focus and sacrifice, and Carlos was performing inconsistently,
JCF likely saw Carlos's prioritization of fun and reset time as the direct cause of those dips in focus.
the injury context provides the clearest evidence of a professional breakdown in communication and trust. The source material details that Carlos suffered a grade 2 sprain.
And JCF's advice was clear. Rest was required, especially after Alcaraz had made adjustments to his movement that put undue stress on other parts of his body.
JCF advised against playing Shanghai without proper recovery.
But Carlos played Shanghai anyway, didn't he?
He did, and that is the crucial conflict point. The coach is prioritizing the player's long-term health and career longevity based on a medical assessment.
And the player, driven by competition and maybe a bit of ego, overrides that advice to compete now.
This moves the disagreement from a philosophical discussion about dedication to a serious professional breach of trust regarding the management of his physical health.
If Carlos is repeatedly ignoring medical and rest advice from his coach, JCF's position becomes untenable, doesn't it? Regardless of their personal affection.
Completely. That makes the separation look far less like a mutual happy ending and much more like a necessary termination of a professional disagreement over how the athlete should be managed. JCF might have felt, rightly, that Carlos was putting his entire career trajectory at risk.
Precisely. And this instability feeds immediately into the narrative around Jannik Sinner. The immediate fanfare, which just surfaced across every tennis platform, was that this benefits Sinner.
And it's not just paranoia, it's rooted in recent results.
Sinner has arguably been the more stable force recently. We know the rivalry is defining, but Sinner has actually done better over the last 2 years, winning 3 of their last 5 matches.
That kind of tight margin means any change, especially one this dramatic, can tip the scales.
And the psychological element is enormous, too. The sources confirm that fans believe Sinner must be in his head, and that the split matters profoundly because Alcaraz is emotional. Things like this matter to him a lot.
removing that rock-solid father figure presence right before the season starts just destabilizes the emotional foundation Carlos relies on. His talent is undeniable, but his temperament without JCF is now in question.
And we have to emphasize how dominant this rivalry has become. Alcaraz and Sinner have effectively shut out the rest of the competition.
They've won the last 8 major tournaments between them, 4 titles apiece. They are, without question, the new Big Two of men's tennis.
A staggering statistic that highlights just how close they are in skill and dominance.
And now, Sinner enters 2026 with complete stability. He has the same coach, the same team, the same focused drive. Carlos, meanwhile, is scrambling to find a replacement for a man who was his coach, his mentor, and his father figure.
The question now hanging over the entire sport is an existential one. Does removing JCF, the man who built the champion, destabilize Alcaraz just enough to hand Sinner the decisive psychological and competitive edge in this rivalry?
It creates immediate high-stakes pressure on Carlos to prove his independence was a strategic strength, not a weakness born of impatience.
So what does this all mean for the immediate future? I mean, the timing is just horrific. The split happened right before the Australian Open.
Leaving Carlos without a coach, going into a new season as a Big Four-esque player, who on earth fills the massive strategic and emotional shoes left by JCF?
It's an urgent existential vacuum. Players at this elite level, especially those chasing all-time Grand Slam records, they simply cannot operate without a highly experienced strategic guide.
The search has to be immediate, and the discussion immediately turns to internal continuity versus the need for external, high-level strategic input.
Okay, so let's analyze the internal option first. Carlos is a product of the Ferrero Academy. Will he continue working with other staff from that environment? The obvious continuity candidate is Samuel Lopez.
Lopez is a known quantity, isn't he? He's already served as the co-coach, often acting as the main coach when JCF was away. He can certainly help Alcaraz with the transition.
And ensure training protocols remain consistent, especially during this high-pressure preseason.
His familiarity with Carlos's game, his habits, his physical needs, that's invaluable right now.
But is he the long-term solution you need for a world number one? The fan consensus seems to lean towards no, right?
That's the consensus among the analysts in the source material, yes. While Lopez is capable, they argue he will need a main coach that has similar experience to Ferrero.
And what does that similar experience actually mean? Someone who has won majors themselves.
Either that or coached a world number one through multiple major victories, or has proven strategic acumen at the very highest level of the game. Lopez currently just doesn't have that top-tier strategic track record to guide a career aiming for 15-plus majors.
And the practical constraints narrow the field even further. The assumption is the next coach must be a Spanish speaker, given the cultural alignment and ease of communication.
Which rules out vast swaths of available elite coaching talent. The pool of realistic candidates is actually very small.
And we have to look for a candidate who is not only a Spanish speaker and highly experienced, but who also fundamentally aligns with Carlos's new vision.
A vision that balances supreme performance with the need for autonomy and fun.
He needs someone who is willing to accept that Carlos will occasionally overrule them on rest days, while still maintaining that competitive edge.
That is a very specific and potentially very rare coaching profile.
The speculation on external candidates was, as you'd expect, a mix of fantasy and genuine strategic thinking.
Oh, absolutely. We saw the excitement around candidates like Nadal becoming his coach.
Though that did generate the funny fan critique that Nadal would immediately tell Carlos to, and I'm quoting here, "Stop hitting such flat forehands. A forehand is only good if it has 5,000 RPM.
The idea of Rafa relentlessly policing spin from the box is, well, it's amusing, but it's unlikely.
The wishful thinking also extended to figures like Roger Federer, with one fan simply asking, "Can a girl dream?"
And the proximity of the Australian Open, where Federer is scheduled to make an appearance, it just fueled that momentary sort of mythological possibility.
And then, in a nod to pure dramatic irony, the ultimate jokey plot twist, the idea of Djokovic winning the AO and immediately retiring to coach Alcaraz.
Which, while entertaining, the sources suggested they might not be the best personality match, given their history.
No. The search will likely involve a lower-profile, highly experienced Spanish former player who is comfortable with Carlos's demands for independence.
Now, connecting this back to the rivalry, the most ironic element of this whole saga is the parallel with Jannik Sinner. All season long, fans and analysts were certain that Sinner would be the one to split with his coach, Darren Cahill.
It was the consensus prediction. Everyone was speculating Cahill was looking to reduce his travel commitment for similar reasons cited for JCF's gradual disengagement.
The universe, however, had a massive sense of humor.
It certainly did. The source material confirms Cahill has publicly stated that he is staying with Sinner for the next season, providing absolute stability to Carlos's main rival.
Meanwhile, Ferrero, the one coach nobody predicted would leave, has walked away.
This profound irony, JCF leaving before Cahill did, it just highlights the true magnitude of the shock. The stability in Sinner's camp now contrasts so sharply with the sudden chaos gripping Alcaraz's preparation.
The pressure is now exponentially higher on Carlos to make a perfect, immediate coaching hire, knowing Sinner is watching with his fully intact, world-class team.
The stakes for the 2026 season have just been raised dramatically. This has really been an exhaustive, deep dive into a defining moment for modern tennis. The key takeaways are just so complex. We have the shocking end to a legendary 7-year partnership.
An end that occurred at the pinnacle of their success, yet was fraught with contradiction.
The split was likely driven by an insurmountable confluence of factors. JCF's long-standing desire for family life, the unsettling possibility of unspoken health issues,
Or, most convincingly, a growing philosophical friction over Carlos's absolute need for autonomy and balance versus JCF's relentless pursuit of perfection in line with that Big Three standard.
and crucially, we need to monitor one piece of contextual evidence very closely as the preseason unfolds.
Yes, the source material notes that Alcaraz is still scheduled to begin training immediately on December 17th at the Ferrero Academy.
He'll be alongside academy players like Koboli,
Yeah.
and presumably under the guidance of Samuel Lopez and the existing physical staff.
Now, if Carlos chooses to remain in that physical environment, continuing to use those resources, it might strongly suggest that the issue was singularly JCF's necessity to step back.
So, due to personal reasons, like health or family, rather than a conflict with the entire management system or Carlos wanting a complete change of scenery.
Exactly. It would turn the problem into a strategic replacement dilemma rather than a full structural rebuild.
If the relationship with the academy remains robust, it softens the blow considerably. But regardless of the practical replacement, there's an undeniable emotional hole left behind. JCF was the anchor.
He was. And that emotional anchor is what Alcaraz himself highlighted. He felt if our sporting paths had to part ways, it had to be from up there.
That emphasis on the emotional father-son bond, it raises the final provocative thought for you to mull over as the Australian Open preparations begin.
JCF was always the emotional counterpoint to Carlos's youth. You'd often see him crying proudly and openly in the box after Carlos's biggest wins. He shared a deep personal joy that went way beyond just victory points.
Carlos is a phenomenal champion, and he is certainly capable of winning major titles without him. But how much did this familial, emotional definition of the sport fuel his motivation?
And will winning future Grand Slams without that figure of immense pride and shared history crying in the box ever feel the same for Carlos Alcaraz? That partnership was about achieving destiny together. Now he has to redefine his destiny alone.